things of the earth need nutrition. Including plants. Most animals can move about to obtain their nutrition from plants or from other animals. But the plants are rooted to one spot. They must make their own food from water, minerals, and carbon dioxide. Today we'll see the role that roots and leaves play in obtaining the raw materials and creating those nutrients. What happens to a plant that can't get the basic mineral molecules, like iron or phosphorus? Such plants will show the effect of those deficiencies. This one, for example, is lacking iron. You can see that its leaves are a characteristic yellow color, and the leaf veins are darker and more pronounced. Here's another example. The tomato plant on the right is lacking phosphorus. Note the purple color to its leaves, characteristic of phosphorus deficiency.
To get minerals for healthy growth, most plants rely upon roots that grow in the soil. Their roots are useful in two main ways. First, they support and anchor the plant. And secondly, they absorb water and minerals from the soil. Roots may be classified according to their form into two general groups. A long principal root that extends deep into the soil is called a taproot. And roots that are mostly branched and divided up near the surface of the soil are called fibrous roots. Let's compare the growth of the two root systems underground and in time-lapse photography. The bean seed on the left grows a taproot system. The corn seed on the right is growing the branched surface roots of a fibrous root system. As you watch the germination of pea seed roots, you might wonder how the tender new roots can penetrate the rough soil. They can do so because the tip of the root is covered with protective cells. Those cells form what's called a root cap.
Under the microscope, you can see the cells of the root cap. These cells are much tougher than the ones behind them, which allows the root to penetrate the soil as it grows. But the roots can respond to changes in the soil as they grow. Here are 3 bean seeds germinating near a rock. Notice what happens when the roots reach the rock. Roots can usually grow around natural obstructions. Moisture is essential for root growth. When the tip of this pea root hits a layer of dry soil, its growth in length stops. This is because growth in length occurs just behind the root cap, which senses the dryness. Here we painted some marks on a bean root. As it grows, you can see that most of the growth is taking place where the gap develops between the dots. Clearly, it's just behind the root cap where the expansion occurs. The part of the root not growing in length grows in thickness. It is here that branch roots grow. Their growth begins inside the main root. If we look down on the main root under a microscope, we can see the early development of the branch root.
At first, the branch roots will appear as buds on the main root. Then they develop into branch roots. Still others will grow out of those original branch roots. And the branching will continue in this way. So in several weeks, a root system has developed that can absorb water and nutrients from a large area of soil. We should mention here that most water absorption occurs in roots near the surface. That's true for both the taproot system, seen here on the left, and the fibrous root system on the right. For example, these cacti have a very good fibrous root system near the surface in order to quickly absorb the sparse rainfall of the desert. This comparison shows the rapid absorption in the watered cactus on the right. Absorption is only one function of roots. The other function is to anchor and support the plant against strong winds and rains. And a secondary benefit of the supporting root system is keeping topsoil in place. For example, if plants are cleared from the land, the absence of roots will cause topsoil runoff during heavy rainfalls.
Sometimes, as in a corn plant, the roots will grow from the stem above the soil to provide additional support. These too can absorb water and minerals. Most of the absorption takes place through root hairs. These radish seeds are germinating on top of the ground, so we'll be able to see the development of the roots and root hairs. The tiny white strands behind the root cap are the root hairs. These greatly increase the surface area of roots for absorption. It might surprise you to learn that root hairs seldom live for more than a few days. So the root system must constantly expand and grow. In fact, a single clump of grass may grow over 1 million new hairs per day. Under the microscope, we can see that each root hair is a projection of a single surface cell. Many of the epidermal cells just behind the root cap elongate to form the unicellular root hair. Inside is protoplasm, which absorbs the molecules of minerals and water. After the roots have absorbed the water and soluble minerals, these substances must be transported upward from the roots through the stem and branches to the leaves. This conduction is accomplished by two different types of conduction tubes, the xylem and the phloem. In the carrot, both are located in this central area. It's the xylem that transports the molecules of water and minerals to the leaves. Here's how a carrot absorbs water and mineral molecules. The water is represented by the light-colored dots and the minerals by the dark. The taproot and root hairs can both absorb directly through their cell walls. The root hairs greatly increase the absorbing surface of the root. The molecules of water and minerals diffuse through the cells toward the xylem in the center of the carrot. Notice that some dark mineral molecules are filtered out and stay in the cortex cells in the center of your picture. The molecules are conducted upward by the xylem, through the stems and into the leaves. Here, in the presence of the sun's rays, the water and minerals are used in photosynthesis to make simple sugars. These simple sugars form the various foods that nourish the plant. The white dots now represent the simple sugars that are carried to all cells of the plant, including the root cells. The sugars are carried back down the plant in the phloem tubes. So the xylem conducts the raw materials for food upward, and the phloem conducts the food back down to all the plant cells. So we've seen how roots are constructed and how they're supposed to work. Yet there's one element that all plants require that is sometimes scarce on farmlands. That element is nitrogen. If a plant doesn't get enough nitrogen, it just doesn't grow as it should. You can see that the new leaves are green, but the older leaves have turned yellow. Here, nitrogen deficiency stunted the growth of the tomato plant on the right. That's why most commercial fertilizers contain large amounts of nitrogen to help avoid this deficiency.
Nitrogen fertilizers are usually in crystal form. Air is mostly nitrogen gas, but most plants can't use it directly. It must first be changed into compounds like this ammonium nitrate. But there are certain kinds of natural occurring bacteria, algae, and fungi which can capture or fix the nitrogen of the air and change it into a form that plants can use. If we take a sample of this water and put it under a microscope, we can see activity there. And if we slow down the action, we can identify the long chain-like algae called Anabaena, which are among the world's best nitrogen fixers. Let's see how the soybean plant utilizes bacteria to obtain its nitrogen. The bacteria live in the soil, and they enter the roots to form nodules. A cross-section of one nodule shows that this tissue consists of plant material and is actually denser than the rest of the plant. Within this tissue are the bacteria which are responsible for the nodule formation. If we prepare a culture of the proper bacteria and place the root hair from a soybean plant into it, we can see how the nodule develops. There's the growing root hair. The bacteria invade the root hair. The bacteria divide and begin to form a colony. The colony takes shape, and the plant tissue within this colony begins to change. It grows quickly and expands until a nodule is formed. Inside the nodule, nitrogen gas is being converted to nitrates the plant can use. Nitrogen is also made available by bacteria, which break down wastes and dead organisms and release the chemical elements that were stored there. So you see, nitrogen compounds can be made available in several ways. Sometimes roots have other special functions in addition to absorption and anchoring of the plant. For instance, the food sent down the phloem from the leaves may accumulate if it isn't used for new growth. We have selected one root cell to see the granules of starch forming. This food entering the cell is not being used immediately for plant growth. Instead, it's stored for the plant's later use. Or it may be eaten by animals.
Up to this point, we've been dealing mainly with two of the basic necessities for plant survival. First, obtaining plant nutrients, and second, the conduction system for those nutrients. A third necessity is for gas exchange, in a sense, breathing. All active plant cells breathe, much as you and I do. Yet plants don't have lungs to inhale or exhale air. So each plant cell must rely on simple diffusion. Most stems and leaves are covered with airtight protective coatings to prevent the cells from drying out in the open air. So gas exchange occurs through pores called stomata. As we can see with the electron microscope, the surface of this leaf is pitted with stomata, or air pores. Here in cross-section are the leaf stomata, which are usually located on the underside. The soft stems of many smaller plants will also have stomata for gas exchange. When a stoma from a leaf or stem is placed under water and viewed through a microscope, we can actually see a gas bubble forming when oxygen or carbon dioxide is released. Some larger plants, like these bushes and trees, have thick woody stems. For gas exchange to occur in the stems, woody plants rely on pores or lenticels. On this trunk of a tree, you can see the lenticels, the slash marks right here. Under the microscope, you can see that the lenticels penetrate into the stem. Gas diffuses through these openings into the tree. Gas exchange for the roots, however, is usually simpler than in the stems and leaves.
In the roots, diffusion can go on directly. Air simply penetrates the surface cells of the root. The condition of the soil is a very important part of this whole process. And here's John Lenanton, botanist, horticulturist from Orange Coast College, who can tell us more about soil.
Lloyd, I think the first important thing is to say what soil is. The soil that I have here, in my hands, started off millions of years ago as solid rock. And then what has happened over those years is that very slowly that solid rock has been broken down into smaller and smaller and smaller particles by things like frost and wind and rain and water and so on. And during that transformation, plants first of all became attached to the surface of those rock pieces. And then later, when the particles were smaller, then other species of plants sent their roots down into these rock particles, in between the particles. And the plants lived there, they died, and they decomposed. And they formed organic material. We sometimes call that humus. And this became incorporated with those rock particles to form soil. Now, the amount of water that a soil holds depends upon two things: the size of the particle that has been broken down and the amount of organic material in the soil. The organic material, the humus, acts very much like a sponge does in the way that it holds water. And now let's look at how water is held in the soil particles. It's held in two ways. One, as a film of water around each particle, and then in the small spaces between the particles. Now, because this particular soil that we're looking at has large particles, it's called a sand soil. The pores, the spaces between the particles, are very large, and that is where air is held. And it is only in the small spaces that water is held. So a sandy soil doesn't hold very much water. It's very well drained, and it holds a lot of air, but not much water. If we move across then to this soil here, which has small particles, and that soil is a clay soil, the particles are very small. They're microscopic. They're packed very closely together. What happens is that with this close packing, the spaces are very small between the particles. And it's in these small spaces that a lot of water is held. It's very difficult for water to get between the particles. There's very little air in the soil. In certain clay soils, you can get to a situation where you have all water and no air, and the roots begin to suffocate and the plants die. The best kind of soil is one that is a mixture of the different particle sizes. Over here, I set up a little experiment a few moments ago with two tubes, one containing a clay soil and the other one containing sand. And in these tubes, I've put an equal amount of water. I'll pour a little more in each one. There and here. Right? Now, let's see how far down the water has wetted the soil in this container, down to that far. Let's see how much the same amount of water has wetted the sand, all the way down to the bottom. The sand does not hold very much water. The clay soil holds a great deal of water. As important as drainage is, some plants have special adaptations that allow them to live with their roots totally submerged in water. This is a mangrove tree. It grows in swampy regions where water will often cover its roots completely. So, the mangrove sprouts air roots. that grow up from the submerged roots and into the air. The air roots are covered with lenticels that permit gases to exchange. Another exception is kelp. Ocean water has plenty of carbon dioxide and oxygen dissolved in it. Kelp is adapted to absorb these gases from the sea.
Thank you, John. We've now examined the three basic needs for plant survival: nutrients, a conducting system, and gas exchange. Let's now look at a few interesting plant specializations and adaptations. For instance, in extremely dry climates, special adaptations help the plant to obtain and conserve water. One that we've already seen is a well-developed network of surface roots. When those roots absorb the water, it's quickly conducted to specialized water storage cells in the stem. The stem responds by expanding like an accordion. Another example of water conservation can be found in some mosses. During dry weather, the moss leaves close to prevent drying. And during moist weather, the leaves will open up once again. Insect-eating plants like this pitcher plant are found in boggy areas where nitrogen is scarce. The spiny bristles prevent this ladybug from climbing upward. So it eventually falls into the water-filled portion, seen here in cross-section. In the dark portion at the base, the plant absorbs nitrogen and other minerals from the bodies of the insects that it captures. And the ladybug is one of them. This specialization of the pitcher plant requires no movement to obtain the extra nutrients.
There are other carnivorous plants, however, that are more aggressive. This is a sundew plant. Its leaves are covered with tentacles that are capped with a sticky substance, which shines in the sun like dew. Instead of simply luring an insect, the sundew will actually wrap its tentacles around any insect that becomes trapped. These carnivorous plants have green leaves that produce food like other plants. They also obtain minerals through their roots. However, those carnivorous plants that catch insects tend to survive and grow better than those that don't. In boggy spots of North Carolina, we find the Venus flytrap. It's perhaps the most remarkable and active of all carnivorous plants. Each leaf is folded in the center and has teeth-like projections. Attracted by the perfume glands along the edge of the leaf, this earwig is making a dangerous exploration. Once caught in the trap, it's digested by the fluid produced inside the leaves. A healthy trap may snap shut in less than 1/2 second. Now let's examine the inside of a fly trap and see the trigger hairs. There are usually 6 of them, 3 on each side. Notice that one stimulus does not cause the trap to close. It's necessary to touch the same hair twice to get action. Or the trap closes when 2 hairs are touched, one then the other. All shots of the trap's closing were taken at normal camera speed. This earwig smells the baiting aroma of the trap, but moves with caution. Luckily, it's too clumsy to enter this trap, and too fast to be captured by this one. Sometimes a trap may be defective and only close part way. This seems to confuse the Japanese beetle. Now the beetle enters another trap that's working perfectly. Earwigs and other medium-sized insects cannot get out of the fly trap, which only squeezes them tighter as they struggle. But the large Japanese beetle is strong and hardy, and after a short struggle, manages to escape. For the Venus flytrap, it's like fishing. The big ones get away.
Some other plants also have unusual ways of obtaining their nutrients. There are specialized plants that don't manufacture their food at all. One kind is called a parasite. It gets its food from another living plant that it grows upon, its host. And if the parasites are too numerous, they will kill their host plant. And then there are the mushrooms. They're saprophytes. They obtain their nutrients from dead vegetation in the soil. And the epiphytes are plants that grow on top of other plants above the ground. They're not rooted in the soil. Epiphytes produce their own nutrients, so they don't normally harm the plant they're growing upon. Some orchids are epiphytes. Sometimes plants grow and survive in places where they wouldn't normally grow, because humans provide additional minerals or water. Often a water supply is the main addition, especially in deserts where the soil is rich in unused minerals. And so, with just simple molecules, the leaves of plants can produce their own nutrients. But the entire animal kingdom, including us, is completely dependent upon plants, our ultimate source of nutrition.